Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Guy Payne, and I'm a member of the Living Earth Action Group based here in Westminster West in southeastern Vermont. And we are the group that's hosting this event. And as a group, and for your information, we meet weekly in a very congenial and caring circle of neighbors, friends, and guests to discover, to investigate, to discuss and disseminate all matters related to the health of our living earth. And then to take action when possible to promote the well-being of all. We do have a website, livingearth.org. And shortly, I want to take a moment to explain how we got here today. But first, I need to turn the meeting over to Colleen Burns of the Green Amendments for the Generations to review the logistics for today's webinar. Colleen?
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I think a few of you in the chat had some questions. So this is a webinar style Zoom, so only these 6 panelists here will have video and audio today, but we do encourage everyone who's an attendee to use the chat box and place your thoughts and comments in there. If you don't see the chat box, it's down on the middle bottom of your screen. There's a button that says chat that will open that up. There's also a Q&A section where you can put any questions you have throughout the presentation, and we will get to those at the end and review them and then open up more questions at the end. We won't be using the hand raising function today, so just stick with the chat box and the Q&A section, and we'll try and keep this to about an hour.
Colleen, could you just clarify about the recording of this event for folks listening?
Yeah, this event is recorded, and we will put it up on the Green Amendments for the Generations YouTube channel, and we can follow up with that with everyone. So if you have friends or family or connections that you think would be interested in learning about the Green Amendment proposal in Vermont, that they can watch that on YouTube.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Colleen. Last December, our little group of 7 became aware of Maya's work on the Green Amendment, and many of us went ahead and read her book. And with some help from out-of-state colleagues and Putney School students and staff, we then arranged to have Maya and her staff come to Vermont and make a presentation during the day at the Putney School, and then in the evening come to the Congregational Church of Westminster West on amending our state constitution to guarantee the rights of pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and a healthy environment. But then COVID-19 hit and all was canceled. And then in May, Maya's national organization, Green Amendments for the Generations, contacted us about the opportunity of an online presentation, and we jumped on this opportunity, thinking that this June presentation would give us time to tap into our personal and social contacts throughout the state, not just southeastern Vermont, as our earlier date would have done. And we knew that passage of this amendment would take the engagement of a host of organizations and leaders statewide. Unbeknownst to us, work had already begun in the Vermont Senate. Senator Christopher Bray of Addison County, chair of the National Resource and Energy Committee, upon hearing of Maya's work, introduced a version of the Green Amendment called Proposal 9, or PR9, in February 2020 to take effect November 22nd, 2022. Don't know why November 22nd, but that was on the bill. Yet many of us know this committee was already knee-deep working on another priority bill called the Global Warming and Solutions Act, which was finally passed out of the committee, I think that this week. And Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman can give us an idea as to where it stands now. But this brings us to today. I would be remiss to not thank everyone at the Green Amendments for the generations. You, Colleen, Molly Ants, and Maya and Annika Van Rossum for pulling this together. And all members of the Living Earth Action Group for their marketing and organizational efforts, especially Caitlin Adair. With this brief introduction, and I'm going to turn this over to David Mulholland, who's also a Living Earth Action Group member, who will introduce our Lieutenant Governor, David Zuckerman, who'll give us the context of Proposal 9, where it stands, and the interconnectedness of Vermont's legislative work on the environment. All is really coming together, and this is an exciting time. David?
Yeah, thanks, Guy. I first want to recognize a couple of attendees for their continued work in issues in Vermont. First is retired Representative David Dean, who is retired, but that just means he doesn't get paid to go fishing anymore. But we're really appreciative of all his work to help make the environment healthy and to preserve it for all Vermonters in the future. I also want to recognize Brenda Siegel, who's a candidate for Lieutenant Governor and has a strong commitment to environmental issues and social issues. So thank you for those folks and everyone for joining us. I first met David Zuckerman, it was probably, David, about 5 million handshakes ago in the mid-90s. Here's what I saw. I saw this young gentleman who was well-dressed, but had rather long hair. Now, I'm a person of the 60s, so that was not a big issue, but maybe I remember the hair for other reasons. But what there was, this young kid among these well-dressed folks in suits, they were listening to him, and he was listening to them. There was a real connection, and it didn't matter which group or which committee or which table in the dining room I saw him at. There was this honest and genuine dialogue that went on. And we're very happy that that also fills over into his environmental concerns. David is a farmer, first and foremost, so his day does not begin in the legislature, but somewhere out in the barn, and where it also ends. So he turns the radio on in the morning and turns it off at night. But in the meantime, does wonderful things for us. So David, we're very glad that you're here with us and to share what you can. He's left the floor of the Senate and has a little break to do that. And without further ado, David, thank you for joining us.
Well, David, I appreciate the opportunity to join you, and I'm sorry that I can't stay for the whole webinar because I look forward to hearing and learning more. As you pointed out, I certainly like to share and speak and advocate, but it's far easier to do so when you can listen, learn, and understand all of the information better. But the Senate is wrapping up today until late August, trying to get the last coronavirus bills through, as well as some housing bills and other bills. And so I've got about 10 minutes, and I apologize to all of you that I can only stay for a short period. First update I'll give you relative to the question raised before had to do with the Global Warming Solutions Act, which passed the Senate this morning. It had come over from the House. It has passed the Senate, and so it's on to the next steps. I actually was not here this morning because yesterday I woke up with a sore throat. I had to call the State House Capitol Police to see if they'd let me in the building because there's a lot of safety protocols, and they actually recommended I call my doctor and get a test. So I was tested yesterday. The test was negative this morning. But that was after the Senate had already done the actions on the Global Warming Solutions Act. So I didn't get to preside over that, which was sad for me because I really did want to see that legislation through. And but it is on its way, and that's very exciting. I know for, I think, probably everybody on this call. As many know, the Climate Solutions Caucus has worked hard to make that issue a priority. But in addition to that, I know a lot of folks also want this to be a first fairly significant step, but ultimately really the opening of the door towards many more steps that need to be taken, that I think we all know need to be taken around really taking on the climate crisis and really starting to to potentially generate revenue and invest revenue in a climate economy of serious weatherization, not a few million a year, but 5 or tens of millions a year for, particularly in my opinion, seniors' home and working class people's homes, because they don't have the resources to do the upfront weatherization that would actually save them money. But by doing that, if we do that in those homes, we help seniors age in place, we help working class Vermonters stay in their homes and also have more money for their other basic needs and to spend in the local economy. So such an investment with like Green Mountain New Deal would actually really satisfy many needs in our state. But also expanding broadband is another investment we need to make. Clearly making solar panel and renewable energy installations on people's homes, again, working class people's homes, much more affordable. So Global Warming Solutions Act is really the law that's going to force the legislature, force state government to finally put real money into the future of our economy and our climate in a way that the political will, while nibbling around the edges, just hasn't been quite able to do. And I assume many of you would agree with that, although I could be wrong. So that bill moving forward is great. I have not yet heard what the governor plans to do one way or the other. I don't tend to hear what the governor's going to do until the same time as all of you tend to hear what the governor's going to do. In fact, I've had one-on-one face-to-face meeting with him in the last 4 years, which may come as a surprise to many. A few group meetings, but literally one face-to-face meeting in the summer of 2017. And because there was only one, I remember it quite well. But then we also have Amendment 9, as you said, and the discussion of an amendment to really start to make some of these fundamental needs, clean water, how can we not think of that as a critical right for Vermonters and the other aspects in order to, again, do what the Global Warming Solutions Act is doing. Make it so that the legislature has constitutional pressure to take care of these issues that have been nibbled around the edge for quite some time. And I will tell you, as an elected official, I recognize why it has been hard for the legislature to do what's right with respect to these really big issues. Because the bottom line is the economy and the topic of politics really ever since Ronald Reagan has been about trickle-down economics, give tax cuts to the wealthiest, and everybody else struggle to get by as your local property taxes or your local splinter taxes and fees really drown people. And it's hard when the environmental consequences have to be paid for by the general public, often of the actions of either a few polluters or the systems we've set up. Even our food system was designed, unfortunately, to not include the environmental consequences of certain types of agriculture, for instance. And so the political pressure to not raise revenue when you need to raise revenue to take care of really cleaning up our waters of the state and other fundamental issues of Amendment 9, until there is the legal pressure that citizens can bring, whether it's through the Global Warming Solutions Act or whether it's through constitutional protection and the opportunity through the 3 branches of government to put pressure to make it happen. Sadly, we are not seeing the political will to do so. Maybe if we had a different governor, we would get a little farther on some of these things. I won't go into a lot of detail there as I'm sitting in the Lieutenant Governor's office. But that would be my brief comments, and I don't know if some of you have something more you want to learn briefly on the Zoom discussion before I have to go back. And I'm sorry that it has to be such a brief visit in this time.
Well, we're really, really grateful, David, for your taking a moment out of a otherwise extraordinarily busy day, and wish you best moving forward.
I appreciate that. And you were right at the beginning, by the way. I first thing I do before I get up, or when I get up, before I eat breakfast, is I head out and give the little chicks their first meal of the day, the meat birds for the summer on the farm. And then I come in and think about my own breakfast. And right before dark, I go out and close in the laying hens and give those same chicks their dinner. And because we're in the legislature right now, sometimes in the middle of the day, my spouse does the lunch feeding. But yes, it's a juggle, but it also gives me sort of a quiet peace at the beginning and end of the chaotic day and creates some rhythm, which I know everybody on this call is, our rhythms are quite thrown off these days. I don't know how many others are going, which day of the week is it? What's happening? Was that meeting yesterday or was it 3 days ago? So having a little bit of rhythm on the farm really does help with the chaos of the legislative work and the work trying to make sure Vermonters are healthy and safe, and we're doing the best we can on economically stable in these troubling times. But thank you again.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you. In the chat room, if you'd like to send a question to David, he has staff here present as well, and I'm sure David would be willing to look at your questions a little bit later. Thank you. We also have a communication here I wanted to read, but I didn't want to interrupt David, from Representative Peter Welch, who couldn't be with us this afternoon, but sends his endorsement and support for our office, for our efforts here through his office, and just wanted to highlight just a couple of things. That he strongly supports the idea of a Green New Deal here, as well as he sees the need to correct environmental, public health, and economic issues. There's also racial issues here, and bringing equality. So I'm going to make this available to the group in another way, but I just wanted to pass along and for David to hear that Representative Peter Welch supports our being here and is interested in learning more how his state progresses in this effort. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the microphone or screen, whatever it is you're supposed to say with Zoom, over to another colleague at League, Cheryl Charles.
Thank you, David, and another thanks to the Lieutenant Governor for joining us this evening very succinctly and effectively in the period of time that he had. I'm delighted to be able to introduce our featured speaker this evening, our guest here, Maya Van Rossum. Before I get into specifics around Maya, I'm going to give you a little more information about how it is at a personal level that Maya is speaking with us tonight. We've talked about the Living Earth Action Group, and Guy Payne gave you some background around that. Those of us who are kind of in the core and meet weekly and help to develop the programs all acknowledge that the actual founder of the Living Earth Action Group is Caitlin Adair. She's the one who first said, we need to do this. We need to come together and take action to benefit the living earth. And that was 3.5 years ago, approximately. Well, how did Maya come to us? Last fall, Caitlin and her husband, Peter Adair, had a house guest. They have an occasional bed and breakfast in their home. Their home is called Sanctuary. Michelle Henkin came over from Maine to visit her daughter at the Putney School. And while sitting around the kitchen table with Caitlin, she began talking about Maya, began talking about the Green Amendment, and just said that with the book and with Maya's instrumental leadership, things were taking off in Maine. Well, Caitlin got so interested in all of this, she read the book, and she began talking with others of us about this idea. And as time went on, and building from what Guy said earlier, it leads us to this evening tonight, where we have the extraordinary opportunity to hear directly from Maya Van Rossum, about the work she's doing, the work she's leading, that gives each of us at the state level the opportunity to amend our Constitution in order to protect the rights of a healthy environment for all. As background, Maya has a law degree. She's been practicing for a number of years. In addition, she's been the Delaware River Keeper for the last 25 years. She's clearly an activist, an effective organizer, I would say a scholar in her own right, because her work is quite thorough. And so you can learn much more about her. I'm not going to belabor her many attributes. We are just quite genuinely thrilled to have you here with us, Maya. Thank you.
Well, boy, that was such a wonderfully generous introduction, and I really appreciate that. Everybody at the Living Earth Action Group has been incredibly engaged in helping to lead this effort in Vermont. And I'm so glad that you told the story about Caitlin and Michelle meeting and how Michelle helped bring this message to Vermont, and that she is actually helping to lead an effort in the state of Maine. She's doing that in partnership with a woman named Andy Burt, and I think I saw both of them in the participant list, which is really lovely. So they are still staying engaged in Vermont while leading the effort in the state of Maine. But really, I want everybody in Vermont, if you're not yet a participant in the Living Earth Action Group, I really encourage you to get involved, because what they are working on is powerful and is important. And as Guy talked about, they mentioned in the beginning, they're very nurturing in their conversations and very open and very engaging and very knowledgeable. So I think it's a really powerful group to get involved with. With that, I'm going to share my screen, I hope. I think so. And just hopefully take you with me on a little bit of a journey to bring us to the place where we are talking about seeking and needing constitutional environmental rights, a green amendment in the state of Vermont. As you've heard, I really wear two hats. I have, at this point now, it's actually for over 26 years, I've been leading a 4-state organization, an advocacy activist organization known as the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And as an outgrowth of that work, I've now started this new national organization called Green Amendments for the Generations. But really, the most important thing for you to take out of all of that about me is to know that I've been doing environmental advocacy and grassroots organizing and litigation for over 26 years now. And it's as the result of that work of very literally day in and day out fighting for the earth. And for all the communities, human and non-human communities that depend upon a healthy environment, that I've come to this realization that we really need a new path for environmental protection here in the United States of America. And why do we need a new path? Well, we can all see, right? The evidence is clear on the ground. We can see that communities across our nation are suffering from pollution and from degradation, and we are very literally facing a climate crisis. And this is no less true in Vermont than it is across the nation. In Vermont, we have communities that are being exposed to toxic contamination across the state, sites that need to be cleaned up. We have air quality issues in the state of Vermont that are presenting health issues for people. The climate changing emissions, surprising to many, have been on the rise in the state, which is why it was so wonderful to hear about the new legislation that is advancing in Vermont. PFC contamination of drinking water supplies. This family, this man-made family of chemicals that is literally toxic is contaminating drinking water in Vermont, as well as in over 33 other states in the United States of America. And of course, it's not just the human populations that are being impacted by pollution and degradation, but plant and animal species of all kinds are also being impacted. So in Vermont, out of Vermont, we can see that our current system of environmental protection laws is literally, truly failing us. Now, whenever I go to work with a community that's facing one of these environmental threats or challenges of one kind or another, inevitably, every community, every person has the same fundamental question that they ask me. And the question is why? Literally, why? Why are we facing this threat to our environment, to our health, to our safety, to our communities? Don't we as people here on this earth have a right to clean water and clean air, a stable climate and healthy environments? Don't we have a right to know that when we go get a glass of water out of the faucet, it's going to be free of dangerous toxins? Or when we take in a breath of air, it's not going to be filled with contaminants that could give us an asthma attack or cause a heart attack and literally take our lives? And the truth is that here in the United States of America, people have all kinds of rights: the right to free speech and freedom of religion, private property rights, gun rights. In the state of New York, you have a constitutional right to play bingo. But in states across our nation, we do not have environmental rights. These simply are not our rights here in the United States of America. Instead, what we have is this wealth of environmental protection laws across the nation, across the state of Vermont, right? We have thousands and thousands and thousands of environmental protection laws. And so people wonder, well, you know, how is it that we have all of these laws and yet we still have this failing system of environmental protection? Well, fundamentally, it's the way these laws are written, the way these laws are allowed to be written under the current configuration of our Constitution. The way our current system of government operates, the way these laws are written, they are written to not just allow, but really force government to think about pollution and environmental degradation at the end of the decision-making process. Whatever decision they're engaged in, whether it's passing a law or issuing a permit or whatever, they force the decision maker to wait to the end of the process to think about the environment, when very literally all that's left to be done is to consider, how are you going to manage the pollution, the degradation that you have accepted will take place. The laws are not written, the government does not operate in a way that focuses on the prevention of pollution and degradation from day one of the governing process. Under this current system of laws, there is built-in racism. Communities of color, indigenous communities, immigrant and low-income communities aren't unfairly targeted for highly polluting industrial operations in spite of the environmental protection laws that we have on the books in states across our nation. They are targeted because of those laws, because of how those laws are written and how those laws are very intentionally implemented. There are a lot of gaps in the laws that we have on the books. When we think about PFAS or PFOA, contamination of drinking water supplies, that man-made family of chemicals I mentioned earlier that is contaminating the drinking water of millions of people across the nation, including in the state of Vermont. For many, many years, and still today in many, many states, there was not, is not regulation to prevent the use of those chemicals in a way that would result in that contamination. There are a lot of gaps in the laws like that. All too often, there's poor implementation of the laws that we do have on the books. And even when we do have decent laws, inevitably at one point or another, somebody gets into a position of power politically that doesn't appreciate the values and the importance of a healthy environment, and very quickly go about the work of rolling back the protections that we do in fact have on the books. And so as a result, we can see that there is something missing. We have all of these laws, and yet we still have all of this environmental degradation and all of these people who are suffering. So the question is, what is that something that's missing? Well, there are a lot of somethings that are missing. But Senator Franklin Curry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania recognized one of the most important missing elements of environmental protection in states across our nation, that we were not recognizing and protecting our rights to a healthy environment in the same way we were recognizing and protecting the other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. We were not recognizing and protecting the rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. And so Senator Curry decided that he was going to change that. And actually in 1971, because of the leadership of Senator Curry, an environmental rights amendment that did in fact recognize and protect the rights to clean air and pure water and a healthy environment was added to the Pennsylvania Bill of Rights section of their Constitution. And so you would have thought, right, getting this powerful recognition of environmental rights added to the state constitution would have resulted in dramatic change in environmental protection in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that Pennsylvania's environments would have been protected much more powerfully than they were being protected in any other state across the nation. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be the story for Pennsylvania's environments and for Pennsylvania's people, because very early on, there was an incredible misuse of this constitutional right. And long story short, almost as soon as it was added to the Constitution, we got decisions out of the Pennsylvania courts, including the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which declared this constitutional right to a healthy environment to be just a statement of policy, to not have the same legal strength as every other provision in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution. The way I like to explain it to people, under the law, if something is policy, it means it's good advice. And good advice, well, you can listen to it or you can ignore it. Either way, you're fine, but you don't have to pay attention to it. And in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, governing officials across the state decided that they were going to ignore it. And that was perfectly fine. And so for 42 years, we had this great language in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution, but nothing had really changed for environmental protection in the state. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, and here comes drilling and fracking for gas from shale to Pennsylvania's communities, bringing with it all of its highly polluting industrial operations, its contamination of the water and the air, the devastation of the forests and the wetlands, the release of devastating climate-changing emissions, and much, much more. And given the lay of the land in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, legally, it was really easy for the fracking industry to advance in these horrifically devastating ways. And yet, the people in power in government in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania decided that they wanted to find a way to make it even easier for the fracking industry to advance under the law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so they passed a law in 2012 that came to be known as Act 13. And Act 13 did many horrific things to the environments and people of Pennsylvania and gave many, many gifts to the industry. Act 13 put in place automatic waivers for minimum environmental protection standards. It gave the industry the power of eminent domain to force the storage of its hazardous gas under people's private properties. It relieved the industry of the obligation to notify those on private drinking water wells that their drinking water potentially had been contaminated by nearby fracking operations, and much, much more. And long story short, if Act 13 had been allowed to stand, things were going to get much, much worse for the people of Pennsylvania. So things were already bad, but they really were going to get overwhelmingly worse. Now, the thing is, when you are in a state where a bad law has been passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, there really are not that many options to, in a very meaningful way, challenge what is about to befall you with the implementation of that law. You can protest. You can try to get the legislators to amend or repeal the law. You could try to get better people into office at the next election, right? So maybe somehow you can change the law later. You can sit back and accept it and move on. Or perhaps you can bring a constitutional challenge, but you have to have a constitutional provision in order to bring that kind of challenge. So in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, protest, amendment, repeal, the ballot box, accept it and move it on, none of those were going to be acceptable options for us. Amendment and repeal weren't going to happen because the legislators and the governor were very much in the pocket of the industry. The elections were going to come too late to protect people in the environment. Protest or accepting it and moving it on, we're also, of course, not going to save our communities. So the only thing that we could think about was a constitutional challenge. And I, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, and my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, sat back and reflected, and we realized, right, that in the Pennsylvania Constitution, we had the opportunity for a very powerful constitutional challenge if we could make the right argument and make it well. That we had in place this constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment that would be violated if Act 13 was allowed to be implemented. And so we decided that we were going to bring this constitutional challenge, and we did so. And in fact, there were 7 towns and a physician that also wanted to challenge the law on other grounds. And so we all teamed up in a case that came to be captioned Robinson Township Delaware Riverkeeper Network versus the Commonwealth. And we all brought our own arguments to the table. And the argument that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network advanced was that Act 13 would result in a violation of the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. Now, at the time we brought this constitutional challenge, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was very conservative, and the Chief Justice was very conservative. So, you know, people were very skeptical about our ability to achieve victory. But we knew it was the right thing to do and that we had to try. And in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory that was actually written by that conservative Chief Justice Castile. And I want you to read with me a few of the things that Chief Justice Castile wrote in the opinion that he issued in December of 2013. By any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation, the drilling and the fracking, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the resources that were going to be harmed were resources that were essential to life, to health, and to liberty, and that the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were to be declared unconstitutional because they would in fact violate the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, with that victory in December of 2013, we not only defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13, protecting our environment and protecting our communities from those devastating harms, but we very literally breathed legal life back into that long ignored Environmental Rights Amendment and restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment. Now, since that victory in 2013, we have been doing the work of defining what it means to have a constitutional right to a healthy environment and defending that right. And we're making important progress. It's not an instant panacea, but we are making important progress. But as we were going forth doing that work, and I kept thinking about the power of what we had accomplished, the power of the words that we elicited from that conservative Chief Justice, I realized that there was a message for all communities in all states across our nation. The message that our rights to pure water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments are truly inalienable rights that are worthy of constitutional recognition and protection. And that we in communities across our nation needed to and need to rise up together and demand and defend our environmental rights. And I believe that the best way we can do that is to rise up together and demand, seek, and secure the passage of green amendments like Pennsylvania has in every single state constitution across our nation, and then ultimately at the federal level. Now, people ask me, you know, why do we need what you call a green amendment movement, Maya? Doesn't this right exist almost everywhere? And the truth is it doesn't. There are only 2 states that have a green amendment like Pennsylvania has. One of them is Pennsylvania, and the other is Montana. There are a lot of states that talk about the environment in their constitutions, but they don't rise to the level of being a green amendment. Now, Vermont is one of the states that has language about the environment in its constitution, but the language that Vermont has talks about fishing, hunting, and trapping rights. It doesn't talk about the rights to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. So what are the essential elements of a green amendment? What is, in fact, a green amendment? Well, a green amendment, as I define it or have defined it, is very specific. It is a provision that must be located in the Bill of Rights or Declaration of Rights section of the Constitution, and it must recognize and protect as an inalienable right of all people, including future generations, the rights to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments, using perhaps different ways to describe that, but essentially it must include that. And it must be self-executing, meaning that the addition of this language to the Constitutional Bill of Rights immediately has legal force and effect. You don't need the passage of a law to give it legal life. Just adding it to the Constitution instantly makes it an enforceable legal obligation. Now, how does a green amendment change things? I'm just going to go through some broad brush strokes, but just broadly so you understand how a green amendment would work if it was passed in the state. First off, a green amendment means that environmental rights are protected as firmly and as powerfully as those other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. I mean, think about the rights to free speech. Think about private property rights. Think about gun rights. If government takes an act that infringes on those rights, what happens? People rise up firmly and demand that their constitutional rights be protected. The courts and other legislators rise up and demand that those constitutional rights be protected. And ultimately, fundamentally, they are, because they are given that constitutional recognition. Well, that same power in the law and in terms of stirring the passions of the people, that same incredible power now comes to bear for the environment. It means that every government official at every level of government, from the town council all the way up to the state legislators, all the way up to the governor, become duty bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people of the state, and they must protect those rights for both present and future generations. It means that the government must necessarily focus on prevention of harm first. So think about it. If the legislators are about to pass a law or a government agency is about to pass a set of regulations that when they reflect, they can see will infringe on the right to freedom of religion or on gun rights, what's the first thing they do? They step back and they reflect and they say, okay, we are duty bound to protect people's constitutional rights. So how can we rewrite this law, rewrite this regulation so that we avoid the infringement of the constitutional right, so that we prevent the infringement? Well, when it comes to the environment, prevention of the infringement, right? Prevent means preventing the pollution and the degradation that would result in the constitutional violation, right? So you necessarily shift from managing pollution and degradation to a thought process focused on preventing pollution and degradation from day one of the decision-making process. Environmental justice is incredibly strengthened because all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their income level, where they live, all people have the same constitutional right to a healthy environment, and all government officials are duty bound to protect the rights of all the people equitably, right? You can't have any more environmental sacrifice zones. Also, government becomes duty bound to engage in informed decision making. They have to think about the facts and the science and the impacts, individual impacts and cumulative impacts of the decisions that they're about to make. And they have to engage in that thoughtful consideration before they take the action. They become constitutionally bound to think about these things before they act. And we have demonstrated that multiple times through litigation in Pennsylvania. Environmental advocates are incredibly empowered intellectually and emotionally because, right, well, in their own hearts, it's enough, right, to be fighting for the earth that they love. But there's something more that's added there. Right now, they're fighting for a constitutional right. And when they go into a room to advocate for the earth that they love, for the community that they love, no longer are they just dismissed by people as tree huggers and fish lovers, but they are actually now recognized for what they truly are. U.S. patriots that are rising up to demand and defend a constitutional right of all people. It's just a different way of thinking about advocacy and advocates, right? I'm proud to be a tree hugger and a fish lover, but you want to also make sure that everybody in that room and on that dais sees you in a way that they respect, so that they want to hear your message. And when you add that constitutional element to the advocacy, it can be very, very, very compelling and powerful. The goal of a Green Amendment is to get better decision making so you can avoid the courtroom. But the truth is, if you have a Green Amendment, when your government officials get it wrong and infringe on your constitutional right to a healthy environment, a Green Amendment gives you immediate access to the courts. We have been taking this Green Amendment message to other states to try to inspire the passage of Green Amendments in states across our nation, as you well know, which is why I'm speaking with you all this evening. And we are having wonderful success. We actually have Green Amendment proposals already advanced in 5 states. And as you've heard this evening already, one of them is the state of Vermont. And we've got incredible growing energy in other states like Maine, like New Mexico, and more. As Guy told you, February of this year, Senator Christopher Bray did actually propose a Green Amendment for the state of Vermont. He actually heard me speak in August at a National Caucus of Environmental Legislators meeting. We stayed in touch and he got right on it. So you actually have the opportunity to get involved in advancing this idea in your state. If you go to VT, VermontGreenAmendment.org, there's a petition and some other information there if you're interested. But what does the language say? For those of you who might be wondering, hopefully you have the face boxes somewhere so it's not inhibiting your view. But this is what the Vermont proposal said. First off, it would be added to the Bill of Rights, which would be very important. And it says that the people have a right to clean air and water and the preservation of the natural, scenic, and cultural values of the environment. The state of Vermont's natural resources are the common property of all the people. The state shall conserve and maintain the natural resources of Vermont for the benefit of all people. So with that, I hope that I've taken you with me on a little bit of a journey to realize and recognize that something is missing from our current system of environmental protection laws, that we do need another path, and that that other path is available to us in the passage of a Green Amendment in every single state constitution across our nation. And once we're well on our way to doing that, to work to advance the passage of a federal Green Amendment. But we start with the states and then we go to the feds second. So with that, maybe I will just leave this. No, I will unshare my screen, but I do have some slides based on the questions that I can bring back up if need be. So Guy, did you want to moderate the chat box or did you just want me to go through it?
I have the questions. I've been following them through the chat. So our first question is from Robert, and it's, how does the Green Amendment compare with the rights of nature initiatives that the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund has championed?
Yeah. So rights of nature is a very powerful concept on many levels, but it is different. So when you, and what it does is it seeks to recognize the rights of nature in the courtroom. So right now, if you want to get into court and you want to enforce an environmental protection law that has resulted in contamination, let's say, of a river, in order to get into that courtroom, you need to find a person that's been harmed and will go in and say, sort of champion the need to enforce that violated law because they have been personally harmed. If you give the river its own rights, if you give nature its own rights, then you sort of can remove the middleman of that person, and you just need the lawyer that is going to represent the rights of the river in the courtroom. The problem is you haven't solved the fundamental problems with the way the laws are written. You still have a system of laws that is focused on permitting and managing pollution at the end of the process, that accepts pollution and degradation as a foregone conclusion, and isn't focused on preventing the harm, but simply managing the harm. You haven't avoided the situation where you have a natural resource that is being devastatingly contaminated by an unregulated toxin because there's no law to enforce. You haven't solved you haven't solved that problem of gaps in the law. There's all the fundamental problems that I talked about with the system of environmental protection laws in Vermont, in states across the nation, still exist. They don't get remedied. It just means that nature now can go into the courtroom to enforce the bad laws that are already on the books that are failing to do the job, but you haven't fixed the bad laws. And so what a Green Amendment does is gives you that constitutional platform that can be used to fundamentally start to shift, change, and transform and fix the broken system that we have in place. Now, I often do get asked this question. I want you to know that. So I have thought a lot about how one might be able to integrate rights of nature into a constitutional Green Amendment. And I do believe that there is a way to do that. I do think that for communities, for states that are interested in that concept, it is definitely worthy of conversation. But I also think that it does change the nature of the conversation when you're advocating for passage of a Green Amendment. First off, fundamentally, a constitution is a contract between the people and their government. And it's the people saying to the government, we have these inalienable rights that we are telling you when you govern over us, we do not give you the right to infringe on these rights. We are holding them unto ourselves. So if you start to put nature into that conversation, it sort of shifts the way the Constitution might work. And so that could impact the way it gets implemented by the courts. One of the powerful things about the Pennsylvania Green Amendment and why a very conservative court spoke so beautifully and powerfully about the importance of its implementation was because it was written in the same way those other fundamental rights were written. And that was just powerful and important. It's also important to remember, just strategically and just being frank, and that many of us truly, truly believe deep in our hearts in the power and importance of the rights of nature. There are many, many people in our states who do not. And so if you add a rights of nature element to your Green Amendment in your first go around, you are going to raise the bar in your effort to seek and secure its passage, which is not necessarily, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think that that's just something to remember as you engage in your strategic thoughts and planning. And then just the final thing I would say is, I don't think that you need to add a rights of nature element for the Green Amendment to be able to have powerful effect every time you have a problem with environmental protection and degradation. I believe that you can always find a person who is harmed, who will stand up and champion nature in that courtroom. So I feel that the kind of Green Amendment language that we encourage gets us what we need. I know that was a very robust answer, but there are a lot of elements to that important question.
So if anyone wants to add anything, I will wait a second. So our next question actually is from David Mulholland. Can you give a global context to the issue? Have other countries adopted a Green Amendment or other similar protections and rights?
So actually, and I do talk about this in the book, but not too much. There are other states that have a variety of have a variety of different kinds of environmental rights amendments in their national constitutions. There are some states that actually recognize the rights of nature as part of their national constitution, which is beautiful and powerful and important. Ecuador, for example, does that. And so I do acknowledge that you have that in other nations, but if you compare it to what I talked about in Pennsylvania or in the United States, right? In the United States, you have Pennsylvania and Montana that have really powerful language that is starting to be implemented in very powerful ways. And then you have a lot of other states that just have language, which really have resulted in some important things, but don't result in that same kind of transformational change thinking and protection, right? They miss the bar significantly. You have the same thing on the international landscape. You might have some that are really powerful and some that aren't. And the truth is, when you're looking at international law and the laws of different countries and how their constitutions operate in their countries, they're different than how they operate in the United States of America. So it's not really an apples to oranges comparison. And we don't really need to try to make that kind of comparison because we already have beautiful role models here in the United States, Pennsylvania and Montana, and we can just turn to them and see about the successes that are happening there, but also learn from the mistakes in those states and make necessary advancements. The modern day Green Amendment that I encourage in states now explicitly mentions stable climate. Neither Pennsylvania nor Montana does that. Explicitly has language that's that we believe will help indigenous communities protect their cultural values in a healthy environment. That's why you will actually notice in Senator Bray's language, you see the cultural values of a healthy environment are specifically mentioned there. That's part of our modern day advancements to try to make sure that we are honoring the important relationship between Native American communities and the environment. And there are other adjustments. So great question. But I try to say, let's stick with apples to apples, which means looking at what we have constitutionally across the US.
So next, it's not a question, but it's an awesome comment from Michelle Boss-Lund. I hope I said that right. I am a candidate for the Vermont State House to represent Windham for Putney, Westminster, and Dummerston. If I am elected, helping move a Green Amendment forward here would be something I would be glad to work on. So that's awesome. Okay, and another question here.
Definitely awesome. Just want to say that.
Inalienable right to clean water, etc., for all people and future generations in a world of limits, question mark. This is from Wolfger, sorry. This may require population stabilization at a sustainable and resilient level, does it not?
Well, certainly population has a really important impact on the environment. So I'm with you there, but I don't think the population stabilization conversation, I don't think you need to have that in order to have the powerful effect of a Green Amendment, right? The Green Amendment is about implementation in context in the communities that you have in place today. So if your population is too large, you still, as a, you know, in terms of the environmental footprint, your government officials still have to honor, respect, and protect the constitutional rights to a healthy environment of all those people. And it's about finding a way to do that. I believe absolutely there is always a way to accomplish our goals in terms of supporting our human needs and protecting the environment at the same time. And in fact, we will best accomplish all of our goals as a community if we do it in a way that protects the environment at the same time. It's all about how you frame the question. So when it comes to energy, right, the fossil fuel industry, the fracking industry likes to say, the question is, should we frack or shouldn't we frack? How should we frack? Where should we frack? I don't think that's the question. The question is, how can we best create energy? If you frame the question that way, right, that's when you get focused on clean, renewable energy supplies. If you have a Green Amendment approach, it drives you to that larger, how do we create energy question, not the do we frack, don't we frack question. So I think that you make an important point, but I don't think that it in any way inhibits the powerful effect of having a Green Amendment. In fact, it actually strengthens the importance of having a Green Amendment because you need to be even more vigilant about how you are overseeing what is happening in our human communities when it comes to the environment.
So maybe this is a question that our other panelists might be able to help with too. Alice asks about how do we address the use of Roundup proposed to fight back invasive plants in the national parks. And she attached a little blurb about it, if anyone wants to read that.
So did somebody from the Living Earth Action Group want to respond to that, or did you want me to? Okay.
Probably,
Oh, go ahead.
Probably best for you.
Well, I just wanted to say, so she was talking about the use of Roundup in the national parks?
That is,
Or everywhere. I mean,
Okay. You know, I, like you, Roundup, glyphosate, pesticides, herbicides are a big problem and a big battle where we live as well, trying to get the school districts and the townships and the departments of transportation to not use them along our waterways, along our paths, and in ways that are so devastating to the environment and to people. You know, one of the things in the national park context, we just have to remember when we're bringing it back to the Green Amendment, a state Green Amendment applies to state government officials. We need a federal Green Amendment to apply to federal government officials, federal agencies. And so that's why achieving state Green Amendments won't be enough. We will need to ultimately also get a federal Green Amendment. But to get a federal Green Amendment, we need the support of 3/4 of the state. So good grassroots activism says you need to start organizing at the state level first. While you're doing that, you might as well get them to pass a Green Amendment. So that's really what we're doing. But it will be, you know, a Green Amendment's not going to be an instant panacea, but if you have a Green Amendment in your Constitution, it is going to be a powerful addition to the conversation and to the argument in all those places and spaces where you are going to be advocating about the devastating impacts of glyphosate, and ensuring that when the government officials are issuing the permits that are allowing the spraying along the waterways or along the parklands, you know, making sure that there was science and thought behind that decision making. We might not always agree with how they assess the science and the thought, but a Green Amendment can make sure that they had to assess the science and the facts and the impacts, right? Which hopefully lead you to a better decision. So I don't want to pretend, I think that you're right, that herbicides and pesticides are a really difficult one to take on. But I do think that a Green Amendment can help advance the conversation. We are going to probably need more science, or you're going to have to be able to bring the facts to bear in that in a particular circumstance to really be able to raise it to the level of being a constitutional violation. We do have to remember, while the Constitution is really powerful, when we have it and can set really powerful precedent with far-reaching tendrils, showing a constitutional violation is also a higher bar. So we will have to work over time towards that, but at least having government officials being forced to think more proactively about protecting the environment can help you on the decision-making front. I also believe that having a Green Amendment in the offing or that has passed can also help with every single election. So just like the candidates that we have that are listening to this webinar, or the candidates that are, part of any sort of debate, or that you're talking to during the election season, every single one of them should be asked the question, what do you think about my right to a healthy environment? And as we start to inject that concept into our community consciousness and the consciousness of our government officials, what we automatically start doing is changing the way we think about candidates. We start electing candidates to office who are being more proactive in terms of protection of the environment, which ups the ante. The better people we get in office, the better regulations, the better legislation, the better implementation, and the better chance we have of getting laws that are going to take care of things like outlawing Roundup because of its devastating environmental and human health impacts. So it sort of raises, it like raises all boats, even if it's not going to instantly solve the problem. And I think that's one of the powerful benefits of having a green amendment as well. It's just changing the entire way people think about and act about the environment.
Thank you. If I could just add, since you opened it up to panelists, on the medical side of things, it seems like a big advantage for the Green Amendment is that it's proactive with respect to the damage that happens. Quite often, I'm just thinking Love Canal, for example, and EPA getting involved. It's usually after there's some medical damage that's being done. So is it safe to assume then that a Green Amendment gives someone the right to be more proactive and say, hey, this condition is out there. Not only is it something I don't like now, but because of future impacts or impending impacts, my rights are being violated now, or my family's rights.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you see that in Act 13. There's also a case in Montana where the courts are very, very clear, right? You don't have, as the Montana Supreme Court said, you don't have to wait until the fish are floating dead on top of the water to be able to bring a successful challenge to stop a bad government action, a bad government decision. Same thing with Act 13. We didn't have to wait till everybody's lives were devastated. All those environments were devastated through implementation of Act 13. What we had to do was make clear that there was an imminent constitutional violation. And as a result, we prevented Act 13. In that Montana case I just talked about, the permit that had been issued that would have resulted in the dangerous condition was voided out. The other thing you can do is you can prevent bad future action. You can address bad acts that are happening right now. If like a permit that was just issued that is going to allow something bad to happen, but you can also address government inaction. So in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we actually have a site. There's a site that has been highly contaminated with trichloroethylene since at least 1985. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection has known about it, has acknowledged how dangerous that contamination is, and has literally done nothing to try to clean that site up. In fact, all of their emphasis has been on how are we going to help a developer bring residential developments to this highly contaminated site. I mean, talk about Love Canal, right? It's a great parallel for this. And so we actually have brought a legal challenge. It's going through the courts, and we've had a number of interim decisions that have been really powerful based on the Green Amendment. And what the court has made very clear is that the government's failure to act to clean up this site where there's this growing pollution plume can be a violation of the constitutional duty to protect people's environmental rights. So you can really hold government accountable in all kinds of ways. And the other thing I want to make clear, a Green Amendment is about holding government accountable, but the government can't give a third party the right to do something that the government can't do. So if a police officer doesn't have the right to search your car, they can't tell the lieutenant governor or somebody else right out there, they can't tell Michelle Henkin out there in the audience to go search your car and suddenly it's legal. No, it's illegal. The government, so in the environmental context, just like the state agency can't dump toxins into your drinking water supply. They also can't give a permit to an industry to dump toxins in your drinking water supply. That would result in a constitutional violation, right? So you attack the government's permitting action, and then that's how you stop those bad third-party acts by industry and others. I hope that's clear. That's a really important point when it comes to a green amendment.
Thank you.
And then this might be our last question. It's the only one left. Is there a way to make sure that an amendment, so Dorothy asked, is there a way to make sure that an amendment is not seen as simply advice? What must we keep in mind so that wording guards against that if it can be done?
Yeah, so I think that what Senator Bray has proposed gets you there. The most important thing is that it's in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, and that you live in a state where Bill of Rights provisions are deemed to be what we call self-executing. And so that they have that legal force. No law needs to be passed to give it that legal force. That's number one. So you're right. It's about the placement and it's about the language. But the other thing that you have to do, and that's why this is a really super smart question. If you remember Pennsylvania's story, one of the reasons why they got that bad outcome declaring Pennsylvania's Green Amendment to be just public policy was because the very first cases, or the very first key case that tried to use Pennsylvania's Green Amendment was a stupid use. And these people had no business trying to assert that what they were talking about was a constitutional violation of the rights to a healthy environment. It just was a real misuse of the law. And so I think what you had was you had a Supreme Court that said, whoa, wait a second. If this is what you think this law, this constitutional right means, like, we're going to just nip this right in the bud. And they misinterpreted it, right? They declared it to be just policy. And so that's why you had the problem. So a really important thing to do is once we get a green amendment in the state of Vermont, we're going to want to work together. And my hope is that our Green Amendments for the Generations organization continues to grow so we could help with these kinds of resources. We're going to want to make sure that those first test cases are super smart cases, so we get good decisions right out of the gate that ensure that the Green Amendment is properly interpreted and properly applied. If we do have a situation where we get a bad early decision, we're just going to continue to battle on to turn that around. I mean, there are many times in history where the courts improperly applied, right? Rights of all kinds, civil rights, environmental rights, political rights of all kinds. And it may have taken a long time to turn things around, but people remained vigilant and dogged and kept bringing cases until they got the proper interpretation of the law. And we started to turn things around. That's what happened in Pennsylvania. That's what has happened a lot at the federal level. And that's what we would just have to do. But hopefully we'll avoid that situation because we'll get good language, good placement, and good early cases to lead the way.
So those are all the questions that have been posted.
Great. So I really want to thank the Living Earth Action Group for hosting this and helping us to organize this. I also want you to know if Vermont Law School, their environmental law students are starting to organize around this, which is really wonderful in that portion of the state. If you did buy the book, all the proceeds go to the Green Amendment movement. But you don't have to buy the book, of course, to learn all about this. If you go to forthegenerations.org, there's a wealth of information, and there is a page dedicated to Vermont where we have information, and we'll continue to post ways people can get involved. And if you want to be part of this movement, stay in touch with us, stay in touch with the Living Earth Action Group, who is really helping to lead the way in the state of Vermont, and we can all work together collaboratively to make it happen. So thank you.
And as I suspect, Maya and everyone, this is bringing us to a close. And so with the sincerest of gratitude, we want to thank everyone from the Living Earth Action Group. We want to thank you and folks for the generations, or the Green Amendment for the generations. That's a mouthful.
There's a whole history behind the name too, but it's a good one.
For the work that you are doing. And I hope everyone who's listening will be following the work. So far, I think it's still within the Committee of the Natural Resources and Energy, as well as letting your state reps and senators know of your involvement and interest in this passage. I know what has happened for many of us. We have reached out to a number of organizations throughout the state. Not sure how many of them are represented here, but we did reach out for the Natural Resource Council through Vermont350.org, Vermont's Healthy Soils Coalition, Vermont different conservation committees, the regional commissions, Vermont Law School we did connect with over and above what you were doing. And you know, the challenge when you're thanking everyone or introducing everyone, you probably missed a few, so my apologies if we missed out on those. So bringing us to an end, Maya and all, blessings to you all. And we wish you a healthy and safe weekend, and as much as possible, a joyous 4th. Go Vermont.